I never believed in fairy tales. My life was built on the forest, its logic, its instinct, its food chain. I could hear the difference between a deer breaking brush and a cougar's silent step. I could track a bobcat's paw prints from 20 paces. I could smell a bear long before it came into sight. The woods were my truth, my refuge, my hunting ground. Nothing about them ever felt mystical or haunted. That is, until the fall of 2003. I've tried to explain it 1,000 ways. Maybe a mutated bear, maybe hallucinations from altitude, maybe just the tricks of a sleepless mind. But none of those answers sit right with me, because Dave saw it too. And his broken ribs, his scars, those are proof that something real and brutal came for us. Dave and I had hunted together for 15 years. He was steady, loyal, the kind of man you trusted with your life when you were 3 miles deep in wilderness. That October, we decided to push farther than we ever had before. We drove my old truck north in California's Siskiyou wilderness, near the Oregon line, a land of steep ridges, jagged canyons, and dark pines so thick they swallowed the sky. A place where people rarely go, but the deer run heavy. And sometimes, if you're lucky, even elk drift through the valleys. We parked on a forgotten logging road, loaded our packs, and hiked 3 miles until we found it. A clearing beside a narrow creek, shielded by rock outcrops. The kind of campsite that feels untouched, as though no human had ever laid their weight there. The first 2 days were perfect. Cold mornings, the ground crisp with frost, coffee steaming in tin mugs, pine needles crackling beneath our boots. We scouted, set up blinds, waited in silence. We saw plenty of deer, but no trophies worth mounting. That didn't matter. We weren't only there to hunt. We were there to breathe the quiet, to sink into that sense that you've stopped being a visitor and started blending into the forest itself. The second night, coyotes sang far off across the ridges. Their cries floated over the fire, wild but familiar, part of the endless rhythm of the land. Everything felt as it should, until the next morning. That's when the woods shifted. It was just before dawn. Our tent was silvered with frost, the air so sharp it cut in the lungs. I was checking the bolt on my Remington when it came, a sound rolling down from the ridgelines above us. At first it felt like thunder cracking inside my chest, but then it shaped itself into something else. A roar, yes, but nothing like the ones I'd heard in all my years. A bear's growl is sharp, savage, edged with rage. A mountain lion screams like a woman crying out in terror. This sound was lower, guttural, and it shook me to the core. It carried a strange undertone, something too human, as if a man's voice had fused with an animal's throat. Pain, fury, and something I couldn't name. Dave's eyes snapped to mine. What the hell was that? He whispered. I forced a shrug, though my skin was crawling. Maybe an elk, I muttered, knowing even as I said it that no elk had ever made that sound. Then it came again, closer, sliding down the slope toward us. Instinct took over. We grabbed our rifles, stepped back into the cover of the trees, our fire snapping behind us. We waited 30 minutes maybe, breath fogging in the cold. The roar didn't return. Slowly we convinced ourselves it was just a bear, maybe one caught in a fight. We moved on upstream, following the plan we'd set. But then the second strangeness came. Every hunter knows the language of dawn. Birds erupt with chatter, squirrels scold from branches, insects drone, the whole forest stirs to life. That morning it was gone. Not hushed, not quiet. It raced, as if someone had sealed the world in glass and drained out the sound. No wing beats, no rustle of small things, not even the whine of a single fly. The silence pressed on my skin like weight. Every step cracked too loud underfoot. Every branch snapped like it wanted to give us away. My nerves buzzed, my neck prickled. I kept glancing behind us, convinced something was pacing us unseen. Dave finally broke the hush with a whisper that was almost a plea. "Bill, I don't like this. Let's go back." I wanted to. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but pride or maybe stubbornness pinned my feet forward. We were hunters, not prey. That's what I told myself. Another mile of that oppressive silence, and we came to a meadow ringed in tall grass. Across the ravine stood a slope of firs, shadows shifting between the trunks. I raised my binoculars. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks. Something moved over there, large and dark, sliding behind the trees. I handed the glass to Dave. He looked for 3 long seconds, then lowered them. His face had drained of all color. "Something's out there," he murmured, "and it's huge." We decided to circle closer, moving tree to tree, our rifles gripped tight, adrenaline hammering in our skulls. I reached the edge of the clearing and froze behind a Douglas fir. That's when I saw it. It stood at the opposite edge of the meadow, half turned away. Not a bear, not a man. Upright, towering at least 8 feet tall, shoulders broad as a door frame, arms hanging almost to its knees. Its body was wrapped in thick, dark hair, tangled and matted. It shifted slowly from foot to foot, swaying like it was thinking. And then it turned its head. I couldn't see its face clearly, just the shape of a heavy brow, a flat nose, but I felt its gaze pierce through the trees. My blood iced over. Dave's breath caught beside me. For a heartbeat, we just stood there, transfixed. Then Dave whispered, so faint it barely carried, "Bigfoot." The words seemed to snap the creature to life. It swung toward us and released the roar again, the same one we'd heard that morning, but now so close it slammed through my chest like a physical blow. The sound wasn't just loud. It was alive, packed with fury, vibrating with something that hated us for even being their dot. And then it charged. I'd never seen anything that massive move so fast. 40 yards vanished in seconds, its arms pumping, legs pounding the earth. The ground seemed to miss a heartbeat under its weight. I shouted, "Fire!" and we both squeezed off shots. The recoil slammed my shoulder. Dave's shot cracked beside mine. I saw blood spray from its chest, but it didn't falter, didn't even stumble. It was already on us. The arm that swung out was the size of a battering ram. I dove sideways, barely avoiding the blow. Dave wasn't as lucky. The sound of impact was sickening, bones snapping like dry branches. My partner, a man built solid at 200 pounds, lifted clean off his feet and flew against a tree with a crack that rattled through me. The creature pivoted toward me. I saw its eyes then. Not animal eyes, dark, intelligent, burning with a cold hatred. That stare held me in place, stretched every second into an eternity. Its smell hit me, a stench of wet dog, rotting leaves, and something sharp and musky that made bile rise in my throat. It stepped closer. I had 1 second, maybe 2. My hands acted without thought. I leveled the shotgun from the hip and pulled the trigger. The blast erupted point blank into its chest. The sound it made still haunts me. Not a roar this time, but a scream, pained, shocked, alive with disbelief. It staggered backward, clutching at its torso. I saw the dark blood coating its fingers. For the first time, its eyes showed something new. Not rage, not power, surprise. That hesitation saved me. Instead of finishing me, it turned, released one last guttural bellow, and vanished into the trees. Branches splintered, saplings snapped. The earth trembled as it bulldozed its way into the ravine, until even that destruction faded, leaving only the silence. I stood frozen, the rifle limp in my hands, smoke curling from the barrel. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. And then I remembered Dave. He was crumpled at the base of a tree, gasping, his body twisted unnaturally. His jacket was shredded, his chest slashed open by marks too wide, too deep to be claws I recognized. They looked as though someone had raked him with sharpened steel. Blood stained his shirt, his breath rattled. I dropped to my knees beside him, calling his name, shaking him. His eyelids fluttered. His lips parted around a whisper. Ribs broken. Under my palm, I could feel the bones shifting wrong beneath his skin. 3, maybe more, shattered. He was hurt bad, and we were 3 miles from the truck, with terrain that felt like 100 in that moment. But I knew one thing. We had to move. And so we did. Step by step, his arms slung over my shoulder, my legs carrying us both. The silence of the woods pressed harder with every stumble, every glance over my shoulder, because I knew if it came back we wouldn't survive. Every step felt stolen. The weight of Dave pressed against me, his groans muffled by clenched teeth. And the forest seemed to lean closer with every stumble, like it wanted us swallowed whole. I had carried men before, in hunting accidents, even once in a logging mishap, but never with this kind of fear shadowing us. Not the fear of losing him, though that gnawed at me too. It was the fear of what lurked behind us, watching, deciding whether to finish what it had started. The trail we had walked so easily just hours before now turned into a gauntlet. Roots snatched at my boots, rocks slipped beneath me, and the cold air scraped at my throat. Each time Dave faltered, my gut clenched, half certain that roar would split the silence again. By the time the sun pushed through the canopy, we had covered barely a mile. Dave's skin had gone pale, his lips cracked, his jacket soaked with blood where the deep gashes seeped through the bandages I'd wrapped in haste. He muttered once something about his chest burning, before slipping into a haze that made him heavy, dead weight against my side. The woods around us stayed unnatural, not just quiet but staged, as if the life had been stripped away and replaced with waiting. The trees didn't rustle. The creek behind us no longer trickled. Even the wind seemed hesitant to touch us. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort, it accused. When the truck finally came into view, that sliver of sun flashing off the metal roof, through the trees, I nearly collapsed from relief. But the relief didn't last, because when we reached the clearing where we'd left our camp, we knew it had been here. Our tent was shredded, not rummaged through like a bear digging for scraps, but torn apart with something closer to rage. The poles were snapped clean, fabric hanging in strips. Our packs had been gutted, contents scattered in every direction, clothes ripped as if they'd been clawed, not just thrown. Even the cast iron pot, one I'd carried on hunts for a decade, was crushed and bent like tin. This wasn't hunger. It was fury. And then I saw them, pressed deep into the mud by the creek, half filled with water, were tracks. Not the confused mess of a bear or elk. Not boots. Feet. Huge human-shaped feet. Each one so clear it felt deliberate, as though it had left them behind for me to find. I crouched, staring, my pulse hammering in my ears. 5 toes, the curve of an arch, the round heel. Perfectly human, except for the size. Nearly 18 inches long. I pulled the tape measure from my pocket with trembling hands. 45 centimeters. A step that deep in soft earth meant weight well over 400 kilos. I should have looked away, should have hauled Dave into the truck and never turned back. But I couldn't. Something about those tracks rooted me in place, like words carved into dirt. A message I wasn't meant to understand. Dave stirred against me, moaning in pain, and the trance broke. I dragged him into the cab, tossed what gear hadn't been destroyed into the bed, and slammed the door. My hands shook on the wheel as I started the engine. The truck roared to life, louder than I wanted it to, echoing off the canyon walls like a beacon. I floored it down that logging road, every pothole and rut jolting Dave's broken ribs, every jolt pulling a groan from his throat. He never asked what I saw in the mud. He didn't need to. His silence was heavy, almost protective, as if even mentioning it would invite it back. 2 hours later, Mount Shasta's hospital swallowed us up. Sterile lights, the rush of nurses, the smell of antiseptic, so alien after the woods. When the doctor asked what had happened, I lied before I could think. A bear, I said. A huge black bear. Dave, through clenched teeth, nodded. The doctor frowned at the wounds. Strange marks for a bear. The claws usually cut thinner, not this wide. He must have broken them, I said quickly. Snapped claws. My voice didn't even sound like mine. The doctor didn't push. Nobody ever wants to believe in monsters. It's easier to accept an oversized bear than something that shouldn't exist. Dave stayed a week. 3 ribs broken, a concussion, deep lacerations that needed stitching. He never once mentioned what we'd seen. Neither did I. It was as though a silent agreement bound us. Speaking it aloud would make it real again. And neither of us wanted that. But silence doesn't erase memory. I sold my rifles a month later. Haven't hunted since. Can't. Not after that. The forest doesn't feel like mine anymore. Even in small town parks, even on dirt trails behind my house, I feel it. The weight of eyes. I'll be walking, and the breeze will shift, and suddenly I'll know I'm not alone. I've asked myself endless times what it was. An undiscovered primate? Something ancient the earth forgot to bury? Or something else, something beyond the rules of biology we cling to? I don't know. What I do know is that in those mountains, near the shadow of Shasta, something still walks. Something that does not want to be found. Something that wanted us gone. And as I tell you this, I can still hear the sound of branches snapping in retreat, and I can still see the print it left in the mud, like a sentence half written, waiting for me to finish. The days after the hospital blurred into each other, but the nights never blurred. They cut sharp. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the echo of that roar rolling down the canyon walls. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart galloping, convinced it was outside my window. More than once I found myself standing barefoot on the porch at 3 a.m., shotgun in hand, scanning the tree line at the edge of my yard, listening for branches breaking. But there was nothing. Always nothing. Dave didn't talk about it. Not with me, not with anyone. He went back to work, carried his scars like old medals, but something in him had dimmed. Before he was steady, solid, the kind of man who could stare down a storm. After, he avoided the woods. Even the smell of pine seemed to make him flinch. We'd hunted every fall for 15 years, and suddenly that part of him was gone, severed. He'd changed the subject when I brought it up. Sometimes his jaw would tighten, like he was holding back words that might poison him if they ever slipped free. I tried to push it down too, but it never worked. The forest had been my second home, a place that made sense. But after that day, it was as if the ground beneath the pines belonged to something else, and I was just trespassing. Even walking through town, when a gust of wind rattled the leaves, I'd feel it again, that charged quiet, the kind that tells you you're being sized up by something unseen. I told myself I'd never go back, and for years I didn't. But the mind doesn't let go of the unsolved. It circles back like a dog worrying a bone. At night, when I lay staring at the ceiling, I'd find myself replaying details, the smell of musk and rot in its fur, the way its scream cracked into something almost human, the look in its eyes when it realized it could bleed. It wasn't just an animal. There was thought behind that rage. Recognition. That's what unsettled me most. Sometimes I wondered if it remembered me too. There were rumors in town, whispers of shadow men in the trees, stories told half-joking in bars about hunters who heard drums in the hills or saw shapes pacing the ridges. I never joined in. I kept my head down. But every time someone mentioned Mount Shasta, something in my chest twisted. That mountain was a wound, and I carried it everywhere. One night, years later, I tried to explain it to my brother. I thought maybe if I spoke it out loud, I'd lighten the weight. I got as far as telling him about the roar. He laughed, said I must have heard an elk bugling in the wrong key. I didn't argue. I just nodded, finished my drink, and let the story rot in silence again. Because that's what happens. You try to share it, and the world folds it into legend. But legends don't leave claw marks. They don't snap bones. Dave and I never hunted again. We never sat across a campfire together after that fall. He moved north a few years later, and we drifted. Not from anger, not from choice, but from something heavier, the way people drift after sharing a secret too big to carry between them. Every time I saw the scars on his chest, I felt the roar in my ribs, and I think he felt it too. But here's the thing. Silence doesn't erase memory. It multiplies it. There were times I'd be driving home late, headlights cutting across the pines, and I'd swear something shifted just beyond the beams. I'd roll down the window, and the night would hit me, thick, watching. The sound of the tires on gravel was the only thing keeping me tethered. And I'd wonder if I killed the engine, if I let the quiet rush in, would I hear it again? Would I see the line of trees bend as it stepped forward? I never tested that thought, but the question never left. Years have passed, and I still see that footprint in my mind, pressed into the mud, water filling its edges, big enough to drown my hand in. Like the earth itself had been branded with a warning. I don't tell this story to convince anyone. I don't care if people laugh or roll their eyes. What we saw was real. What nearly killed Dave was real. And somewhere out there, in the forest shadowed by Shasta, it still is. The world likes to believe it's mapped, explained, understood. But the forest keeps its own secrets. And sometimes it lets you walk out alive just so you'll remember whose ground you stepped on. I think about that sometimes, that maybe it didn't finish us because it didn't need to. Maybe letting us live was the point. A reminder, a warning, a way to carve fear into the hearts of anyone foolish enough to come close. And even now, when the wind rattles my window at night, I hear it again. That scream, half human, half beast, like a drumbeat with no drummer, echoing through the hollow of my chest. And I wonder if it's waiting. Time is supposed to dull things. That's what people say. They say wounds heal, nightmares fade, that what terrified you once eventually turns into just another story. But I've lived long enough to know that isn't true. Some memories don't blur with age. They sharpen. They wait in the shadows of your mind, growing teeth. I never set foot in those mountains again. Not Shasta, not Siskiyou, not anywhere near the ridges where it happened. But avoiding a place doesn't erase it. I learned that the hard way, because even far from the forest, the memory comes for me in ways I can't escape. Sometimes it's the smell, damp earth after rain, the musk of wet dog drifting from someone's backyard, and suddenly I'm back there, shotgun trembling in my hands, staring into eyes that hated me. Sometimes it's the silence. Walking home at night, no crickets, no wind, no sound at all. And I feel the same weight pressing down on me, the silence cracking like old wood. And sometimes it's dreams, the worst of them, where I wake up to the sound of branches breaking outside my window, heart hammering, half expecting to see that massive silhouette framed against the moonlight. Dave lived. The scars healed, the ribs mended, but something in him never came back. He aged faster after that, carried a heaviness in his eyes that wasn't there before. We spoke only a handful of times in the years that followed, and when we did, it was never about the thing. But I could feel it between us, like a shadow neither of us dared to name, a silence with its own language. I stopped hunting, but I couldn't stop watching. Every time I passed a newsstand and saw a headline about hikers missing in the Cascades, about campers never coming home, I froze. I'd study the stories, trace the maps, look at the photographs of the faces gone, and I'd wonder if they too had heard that roar, if they too had seen eyes burning from the tree line. People disappear in the woods all the time. Everyone says the same thing. They got lost, fell, maybe a bear. But I know better. Some vanish into places where the rules change, where the ground itself remembers the weight of something that isn't supposed to exist. I've tried to convince myself it let us go, that by some stroke of luck or mercy it chose not to finish us. But late at night, when the house settles and the world goes quiet, another thought claws its way in. What if it didn't let us go at all? What if we were marked that day, not spared, but claimed? That's the part that keeps me awake. Years later, long after Dave moved away and the story between us rotted in silence, I went for a walk near the edge of town. Just a trail that wound behind the fields, nothing more. The sun had dropped low, bleeding orange through the branches, and for a moment everything stilled. No birds, no rustle, no sound. That same silence, that same heavy pause draped itself over me like it had all those years ago. I stood frozen on that trail, every hair on my arms rising, breath caught in my throat. My eyes scanned the tree line, half praying I'd see nothing. But deep in the shadows, just before the light fell completely, I thought I saw it, a shape too tall, too broad, standing still as stone among the pines. Watching, I didn't wait to find out. I turned back, heart pounding, every step heavier than the last. And when I reached the safety of the street lights, I finally looked back. There was nothing there, but the silence lingered. It lingers still. I know what I saw in those mountains. I know what nearly killed us, and I know it's not gone. It's still out there, somewhere in the vast folds of wilderness where maps blur and compasses fail. Something ancient, something furious, something that doesn't want us here. And sometimes when the night leans too quiet, I wonder if it's waiting for me, waiting for the day I step back into the woods, waiting for the moment it finishes what it started.